Welcome to the podcast of the Public Education Foundation.
I'm Zhan Okuda-Lim, Resident Fellow with the Leadership Institute of Nevada. I'm here today with Dr. Marguerite Roza, who is the director of the Edunomics Lab at Georgetown University and one of the faculty members for the Executive Leadership Academy here at the Public Education Foundation. Marguerite, it's great to have you here today.
Happy to be here.
So during your time with the Executive Leadership Academy, you spent the beginning portion of your instruction talking about the critical role that school leaders have when it comes to budgetary decisions and how sometimes school leaders might feel like their hands are tied when it comes to deciding how to allocate funds for their schools, for programs at their sites. And at times that is the reality. But in other circumstances, school leaders have a lot more say and flexibility in terms of how they can use money to best support student learning and best support their faculty. So take us through some of what you've been sharing with the executive leaders in terms of reframing their place and their voice in this broader conversation about using resources to best support student learning.
Yeah, so we've started to learn through some new research in the last couple of years about what an important role principals play in the school finance puzzle. And many may be surprised to hear that, thinking I don't play any role in the school finance puzzle. But what we find clearly is that principals are the most trusted voice when it comes to finance. Teachers trust principals more than any other group, more than their district, more than even their collective union bargaining partners. And principals hold a lot of power in communicating around finance with families and communities. Also, districts trust their principals, which is sort of an interesting piece of this puzzle. So they're like golden ticket in the whole school finance thing. And that means that where principals have some thoughts about how better to deploy resources to do more for students, they could speak up and have play an outsized role in that. That requires that principals understand finance. And it seems like a really hard, complicated topic at first, but we find that with very, very little exposure, principals pick it up really fast. And partly because they have more context around their buildings and what resources are there. And once they start to attach dollar figures to those things, they can see, wow, I'm spending a lot of money on this, but not very much money on this other thing. Or I feel like I could leverage this money better if I had this other thing. Or, the best way to get the most out of the staffing mix I have is to ask for something else or a replacement or some supports or something like that. And so because principals have this information, being able to step in and contribute to the conversation means that they'll be heard, and what they'll likely do is increase trust that the system runs well. So that means that if you're a principal, first thing you want to do is understand the finance, sort of look up and figure out what things cost. Then you want to turn around and potentially engage with your district on any thoughts you have about how better to use resources. And that can't be more, right? It might have to be, I'd rather have this instead of that. And then it means you can also turn the other direction and engage with your teachers and your parents about what we're spending and why and what we're hoping to get from it. And that's where the real opportunity is.
And take us through a bit more about the research that you and your colleagues and others have been doing in terms of what school leaders and other educators might think or perceive when it comes to school funding and what their reality might actually be. You've shared some of that research with our Executive Leadership Academy participants when you and your colleagues have done some interviews with educators from various different backgrounds across the country. Tell us a little bit more about that research and what you've been hearing.
Yeah, so we partnered with a couple of other groups on this work, and the other groups went out and interviewed principals from around the country and district leaders and teachers as well and parents, and asked about how much do we spend in schools, what do you think of this, what do you think of that, how does the whole system work, and realized that there's a relatively low knowledge level right now. And in fact, for principals, one of the first questions was all in, how much is spent on your school? And principals gave out what would otherwise seem to be too low of numbers like $40,000 or $60,000. which obviously don't even include their own salaries or the teacher salaries in the building. And that was a reminder that most principals answer the question with the dollar amount that's in their flex budget, right? Like their sort of supplies, field trippy kind of budget. And what we found was that that may have been the only visibility that principals have had into dollar figures spent in their building. But that given a fuller picture of the resources spent in a building, maybe we're spending $80,000 on a librarian position and a reading coach, or, who knows how many thousands of dollars on the math department or athletics or, the vice principal or things like that, that principals did see all of those resources and start to think, wow, here's some ideas about how to better deploy those resources to do more for the kids that we serve. And the principals were very quick study. They have a sense of it. They know what the problems and challenges are in their building. They also know what the opportunities were and had really good ideas about how to help this system work smarter. And so that's what we found. We found overall, principals hadn't had a whole lot of training on school finance generally in their certification programs. So that's an area where they need to do potentially get some more. And we're trying to build more and more training programs to fill that void, build a curriculum so other people can use it in their training programs and so on. But we were really optimistic about the role that principals can play. So sort of excited about that.
And also in this research, you've gotten feedback from families and parents in terms of what they might perceive when it comes to school finance. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think if you're a parent, you've heard, or even a teacher, you've heard a lot of messages about scarcity, that we don't have enough, and that's probably true. We don't, but at the same time, you haven't heard what do we have and what are we getting for it. And so there's this sense in people in the system that there could be an unlimited amount of money if I just ask hard enough. Like I need to go to the district or to the principal or somebody and say, I really want to protect this program, or I want to keep this program. Can't you also do this? And then it's my job to sort of ask for more. What that misses is the sense of trade-offs. Like if we do that, then we can't do this other thing. The district has a finite amount of money in any given year. Yes, the district could go to the state and ask for more. But once the resources are there, it's fixed. And so if one school gets more, another gets less. If one program gets started, we cut another one. And that sort of sense of trade-offs, I don't think has been well articulated there. So those are some of the things that we're learning and sort of need to share out so people can make really informed decisions about where to put the limited dollars and what we hope to get in return for them.
And to that point, one of the exercises that you took the executives through was a scenario where a school had to make a certain dollar amount in cuts, but by having this broader perspective on how resources can be allocated, school leaders and other educators and stakeholders in that school community don't have to be limited to just the flex budget or the supply budget. You can also look at if you have a teacher retiring, and that frees up some money in your own school's budget. How can you use that opportunity to balance? Or looking at other sources of funding that might not be in that immediate top line you see in the budget. It's an interesting exercise to think more broadly beyond what is just at the top of an Excel spreadsheet.
That's right. In education, almost all the money's in labor. And we sometimes forget about the labor when we're talking about computers or, food services or calculators or things like that. It's really all labor. And one of the things in education is that, when people come to work at a school, they sort of anticipate they'll have access to that job in perpetuity. And so I think we need to take that into account. We need to say, it's not going to work if we willy-nilly go, we'll cut these positions and add more here, and we'll cut these positions and add more here. I mean, these are people who bring their heart and soul to the job every day and have relationships with kids and each other and so on. And so a better way is to think about change when you have staff attrition. So when you have someone leaving and say, all right, so what do we want to do with that money now? Sometimes people will say, I mean, if the second grade teacher leaves, obviously you have no choice but to hire a new one. Well, actually, you do have a moment now. You could rearrange your staff, contemplate putting the reading coach into the second grade classroom. Are there ways to kind of reorganize the staff a little bit differently? If a vice principal is leaving, do we need to fill that position, or could we use those dollars to potentially for stipends to raise the pay for the rest of the people in the building? And that's one of those, we've not had enough conversation about those trade-offs. If we have more staff, we will have lower salaries. That's the trade-off. If we have, so if we keep saying, well, we need smaller classes and we need more aides, that means there will be fewer dollars to give pay raises. And that's where I think stopping and taking a look at the whole puzzle and sort of proceeding thoughtfully might open up more opportunities.
And that's a segue, I think, to this larger system conversation about how schools are funded. Here in Nevada, since the 2019 legislative session, we're now in an interim period, shifting away from our half-century-old funding formula to a new weighted student funding formula model. And during this transition period, there's a commission on school funding comprising stakeholders and education and other community leaders who are tasked with looking at what this funding formula and weights and other ancillary aspects would look like moving into future school years. Now, recently, just a few months ago, last fall, you and your colleagues with the Edunomics Lab released an updated report about how states should stop using yesterday's funding models for today's and tomorrow's students. So what are some of the trends that you've seen over the last couple of years as some states, as some large school districts have shifted away from older funding models towards new weighted funding formulas? And what are some of the things that state leaders should keep in mind as they're exploring these new funding opportunities for public education?
They are moving in that direction, right? And the idea is I will fund the kids. So how many kids do you have times a fixed amount of dollar per kid, a larger dollar amount if the kid comes with some kind of high needs. And that way we look at the funding formula from a perspective of equity. What, how many dollars actually go out on behalf of different kids. And then we leave some of the decisions about how to spend that money to the lower levels in the system that are closer to the students. And they take into account the sort of unique needs of the kids. Also the history of the school, the context, the parent population, the kinds of teachers that they have available there. And they start to realize that the people in the building matter, and we might be able to staff and design programs around their strengths and cover for their weaknesses in ways that are thoughtful, I think. That model is one that does rely on the schools in the districts, depending on, to play a larger role into making decisions. So the money comes with fewer strings, I guess. So that makes some people nervous. They don't trust the schools or the districts, and so they want to have some guarantees that this dollar amount used to pay for this teachers, and you have to pay for professional development, or you have to spend money on these certain kids. And when they add more and more rules, they take away more and more of this role that we want schools to play, which is figure out what your problems are and solve them. But if it's not your job to do that, then if there's problems, they're going to shrug their shoulders and say, well, the legislature already made all the decisions about how to spend the money. And so it's really kind of a stepping out of compliance mode and moving more into problem-solving mode. And I had a legislator from one state say, why would we do this? This is like jumping off a cliff. Why would we let all of these districts or school leaders potentially make their own decisions? They're going to go nuts. They're going to make all sorts of crazy decisions. We're going to have to micromanage all the mismanagement of funds. And I think the realization is that that's not what happens. And if we're carefully tracking the outcomes for students, we're going to see if there's any problems. Also, parents are really good accountability force. They scream if you start doing really dumb things with their kids. Like if the whole faculty goes on a a professional development vacation to Hawaii for a week, the parents are gonna pay attention to that. But if and then, as part of that, parents want to make sure their kids get arts. They want to make sure their kids get music and PE and things like that. So there are other eyes on the school, in a sense. But I think the legislator who said that was worried that schools would make dumb decisions. And what we find is schools often spend their money in many of the same ways. And some people will say, then why do this? But now they've chosen to do that, and that changes the way they think about their money. This is my choice. And when we see differences in decisions, we see micro decisions here, right? Like a few more teachers and less administrators, or maybe more a specialist in an area where we've been having a problem, and so they're not drastic changes, but they are their decisions. Even the decision to not make any changes is their decision. And so those in the building are that much more invested in making sure that they work and that their kids are well served.
One of the exercises you shared with the executives here was a scenario. Let's suppose that in the state budget there's an extra $1,000 per English learner in a school. And there were a series of questions that the participants worked through in terms of what accountability measures could look like and what strings would be attached to the funding. Like, should the money be spent only on services for English learners, or should the money only be used to serve English learners, period, and not other students? But one of the options you put there was, should the state require schools to disaggregate the achievement data writ large of English learners as a result of receiving some of this funding
by school?
School, right? Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit more about what that discussion was on how it might seem obvious what the accountability measure ought to be, and yet sometimes it's overlooked.
Well, I think where legislators are worried, if I just give this money in what feels like a blank check to schools and districts, we hear lots of concerns. They'll negotiate it away and give away big pay raises, and no one will feel at all obligated to serve the kids well. Or they're going to spend it on the golf team, or it's going to evaporate in some sort of way. And so then the instinct is to put more controls on the money. You can't use it for this. You can only use it for that. It has to be used. These kids have to be served, so on. That instinct, I think, overlooks a better way of thinking about how to measure the effect. And that is to say, we're giving you the money. We're going to carefully track, let's say it's for English learners. We're going to carefully track whether or not the money at each school yields benefits for English learner students, whether that's through their reading or math scores or graduation rates or who knows what. And we would like to see that go up. And frankly, it's up to you how to spend it, but get the scores up. And if that is the goal, what we can see is more thoughtful problem-solving approaches in the building. But if instead the state comes in and says, no, I'm going to give you all these instructions on how to use the money, then it's the school's job to be in compliance with that, not to actually solve the reading problem or the math problem. And so I think in the long run, the piece we often overlook, which is let's be very careful about measuring the outcomes, tracking them, and be explicitly clear that that's what we're expecting in return, that we forget that is itself its best set of guardrails, right? That's what's going to get the schools doing what they can to solve their problems.
Definitely, there are a lot of opportunities ahead in the world of school finance, both at the school level and also at the state level. And here in Nevada, as educators and state leaders are exploring these topics, there's a lot of good to see in terms of where comparable states and districts are going, and what we can learn to best serve students here. So Marguerite, thank you so much for making the time to join us here for the Executive Leadership Academy and share some of your insights and reflections here on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Happy to come anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you.